All right, everybody, welcome to this video where we're continuing our conversation on the counseling applications or the helping applications of this very first theory that we're talking about in our class, psychoanalytic theory. So before we get into talking a little bit about some specific kind of ideas from this theory, let me just kind of highlight this idea that's really, really important, and it's this. When you and I work in a field like social services, we work with a wide range of people with a wide range of issues and struggles and strengths and resources and that kind of thing. And there really are a number of different ways to work with people and a number of different ways to approach people and their struggles and how we can help them. That's why we have all these different helping theories and counseling theories to draw from, or we don't have just one. We have a number of different approaches that we often can and we do use. And so there's a lot of different ways of approaching people and helping them to understand themselves better and deal with whatever issue it is they're dealing with and come up with solutions and that kind of thing. So these ideas in this video that we're getting ready to review are really just one example of ideas that we sometimes draw from that come from this particular theory. And we're going to talk about a lot more other different, similar, but maybe even different approaches as we go all the way through this semester. So we just talked about how, from a psychoanalytic perspective, how would we work with people when it comes to helping them, whether we're a counselor or a caseworker or a therapist or a social worker or whatever we are, how would we draw from this theory in helping people to understand their situations and then come up with ways to overcome and deal with them? Well, number one, main thing is we want to, from this perspective, this theory would promote the importance of how you and I, as helpers, need to, whenever and wherever we can, help make the unconscious conscious. Because again, this theory teaches that that's really probably where the root of a lot of our struggles come from, is probably at the unconscious kind of level, right? So the idea is that as helpers, we are objective. Maybe you've heard that kind of that idea that when you and I, sort of in our own lives, we're oftentimes too close to our situations. And it's not that we're not intelligent or not that we're not smart. We just oftentimes don't see options and things because we're just too close to them. Maybe you've heard of the term a blind spot. If you take face-to-face classes with me, in probably every single class that I teach face-to-face, and even in online classes too, I talk about this old idea that comes from this theory called a blind spot or blind spots. And the idea that all of us have blind spots in our lives, things that are about us that it's hard for us to see, but other people see them. That's why they're a blind spot. They're blind to us, but other people around us can see them more clearly. And that's just kind of the way that's just the way that our mind, our emotions, our lives, is the way we are. And that idea kind of in a way comes out of this theory, this idea that we can have things about ourselves that we're not even fully aware of, whether it's our emotions or it's solutions or it's why we're doing what we're doing or why we're struggling like we're struggling. So from a helping perspective, part of our role as a helper, because we're objective, is to help people to see their blind spots. That's another good way of saying making the unconscious conscious. And there's a bunch of different ways we do that. Let me list several of them for you. And again, almost every single one of these is also summarized in the lecture notes, so you can go there and get more information. Number one of the ways we can help make the unconscious conscious as helpers from a psychoanalytic perspective is we look for what is called transference. Transference is kind of like a defense mechanism. We talked about defense mechanisms last week. And transference is similar to a defense mechanism. It's a little bit different. Transference is a term that Freud coined that refers to the unconscious process where a client transfers their old issues onto the helper or onto other people. It's kind of like projection. We talked about projection last week as a defense mechanism. Transference is sort of like projection, but it really refers more to the helping relationship. And the idea was this: Freud found that a lot of his clients would transfer like their issues like with their father, because he was an older male figure. He would find that oftentimes unconsciously his clients would transfer onto him their feelings and thoughts related to their dads onto him. And so he kind of became almost like a father figure. And when he began to notice that, he began to call clients' attention to it, that they were doing it as a way to help them to kind of understand and see, hey, what's kind of going on here? Many of you who work in social services, I'll just give this as an example, you're going to go forward, and what's going to happen is your clients are going to transfer their stuff onto you. And that could be because you're a woman. They don't have good relationships with women, and you're a woman. so they don't trust you. Or maybe they see women in a certain way, and they're gonna try to treat you as a woman, for example, the way they treat all the other women in their lives, or men, or vice versa. Some of you who are listening to my voice are men, and a lot of your clients are going to be women. And many women have had negative, unhealthy relationships and experiences with other men. I've had that experience as a helper many times. A lot of my female clients oftentimes are distrusting of me. And one of the reasons why is because I'm a man. Now, it's really not about me, though. It's about their issues with men. And they're just transferring it on to me as a man. It's called transference. It happens all the time. Sometimes when you and I, for example, I remember a couple of years ago, I was leading a group. And this was a group here in our area where the men were mandated to come. It was a men's group. The men were mandated to come. They were involuntary. And it was very, very typical from the very first time I met a client. So these are men who do not know me from Adam. I don't know them. They don't know me. My mindset towards them is I am open to them. I want them to come in. I'm trying not to prejudge them. I'm just open to them. They can come. They can say whatever they want to. They don't have to worry. They don't have to distrust me. But many men would come in and automatically they would distrust me, really for no reason. And the reason why was because I was an authority figure, because I was leading the group. And they had had bad experiences in the past with authority figures. And they brought those old issues into the group and they put them onto me, we would say. So because I was an authority figure, they naturally did not trust me. I had to earn their trust. It's called transference. And one of the ways that we can kind of raise people's awareness and make the unconscious conscious, especially when we're doing counseling, is we're listening for, Freud would say, be open to, be prepared for transference. And when it happens, call the client's attention to it. Just naturally. Don't get onto them about it, but draw their attention to the relationship between you and them, maybe through a question, maybe through a comment, maybe through other things. But the idea of help, because kind of the idea with transference is oftentimes clients are not aware they're doing it. So you kind of draw their attention. You say, hey, what's this about? I'm kind of getting the sense that you're not liking what I'm saying today. I'm kind of getting the sense that you're kind of standoff. I'm kind of getting the sense that, you have a real hard time being open with me. Let's talk about that. And it's a way to kind of raise their awareness as to, hey, what's going on here with me and this counselor? So transference. Another thing we do is we confront defense mechanisms. So from this another way to kind of make the unconscious conscious is we would listen for not only would we listen for transference, we would kind of listen for and be on kind of the lookout, so to speak, where people are in denial, where they rationalize, where they overcompensate, where they're engaging in projection or regression or repression, all those defense mechanisms we covered last week. A defense mechanism is an often unconscious, often unhealthy coping mechanism in which we deal with the world where we twist reality because we don't want to deal with it. And so Freud would oftentimes, because he knew people that's how we were kind of wired, he would listen for defense mechanisms, and sort of like with transference, he would draw the client's attention to it just through a question, just through a statement. He would say, maybe if he noticed that a client was projecting, he would say, isn't that really, all those things you're accusing people of, don't you do that sometimes too? As a way to, again, it's kind of a confrontation question, a little direct statement or question. And it's a way to kind of draw the client's attention to something, which is what confrontation is. Confrontation is not getting in someone's face and yelling at them. It's drawing their attention through a verbal statement to something that they may not see or don't want to look at. So we sometimes confront defense mechanisms. I also mentioned for you in your lecture notes things like dream analysis and something like free association. Those are two older school kind of Freudian, kind of counseling approaches that you can read more about. I think I asked you about them in your homework this week. You can read about dream analysis and free association as well too. And then one of the big things that we talk about in the lecture notes that the author of your textbook also talks about that really is kind of foundational to psychoanalytic helping is this. Here's another way that we are analytical and a way to kind of make the unconscious conscious, and it's this. We look for symbolic behavior and problems. Now, what does that mean? Symbolic behavior and problems. Well, one of the things that this theory says is that one of the ways that our old unresolved issues from our unconscious mind show themselves is through in our present day behavior. And oftentimes when you and I struggle with problems, All that is a reflection of deeper issues, if that makes sense. The example I used in the last video of the friend of mine who has some old unresolved hurt and hatred and unforgiveness in his heart, and it comes out through his behavior. Happens all the time. So one of the things, another way to make the unconscious conscious, is by looking at people's problems as simply being symptomatic. Well, symptomatic of what? Symptomatic of deeper issues. And that's one of the key foundational ways that we use psychoanalytic approaches. And so it's one of the ways that we are analytical, is we don't just accept problems at face value all the time. So for example, the example I oftentimes use is, if I was your client, I think I may have used this example last week. If I was your client and I came in and I was working with you and you said to me, hey, Glenn, so what is it? What brings you in today? What do you want to talk about? And I were to talk to you about my depression, and I have anxiety, and also too, I don't get along well with I have a hard time at work. I've lost a bunch of jobs and whatever it may be, right? Well, from a psychoanalytic perspective, what you would do as my helper, if you were using this perspective in your work with me, is you would not accept those problems as just everyday face value problems. You would say to yourself in your mind, and you might challenge me too, how are these issues today connected to deeper issues? So, Glenn, you talk about how you struggle at work. Let's talk about work. What is it about work that you don't like? Well, why are you always having a hard time at work? Maybe I tell you that I don't ever get along well with my coworkers, or I tell you I don't ever get along well with my bosses, and that's why I get fired all the time. You might begin to think in your mind from an analytical perspective, right? I wonder why Glenn doesn't get along with people in authority. I wonder why he doesn't know how to play well with others. I wonder what that's about. And instead of just focusing on teaching me how to kind of be more responsible, you might challenge me with some questions about, what is that really about, Glenn? You know, I might say, typically what clients often say and what we say about ourselves is, that's just kind of the way I am. Well, this theory would never accept that statement at face value from a client. That's just kind of who I am. Freud, if he was our therapist, would say, well, why are you that way? I understand that's how you are. Well, how did you become that way? Why is it that you are that way? And a lot of times clients say, I don't know, it's just the way I was raised. Well, let's talk about how you were raised. And so again, a lot of times from a psychoanalytic perspective, we might challenge clients or ask clients respectfully and politely to tell us about their childhood and tell us about their past experiences. Kind of the idea that the symbolic behavior would be this. Maybe Glenn struggles with authority figures because as a child, the people who were his authority figures were real cruel to him, or he had he had negative relationships and experiences with authority figures as a kid, or he didn't have good role models. And what we're seeing today in the present day with Glenn is just a symptom of a deeper issue. So we want to go down to the deeper issue. We just don't want to teach him how to get along well with other people as an adult. That's important. But maybe what we got to do is go down to the root. I bet the root, this theory would say, I bet the root for this guy is a little bit deeper, right? So one of the things that this theory sort of, another way we make the unconscious conscious, is we sort of see everyday problems and behavior as symbolic or symptomatic. Well, symbolic or symptomatic of what? Of deeper unresolved issues. And we want to go down to the root. And the way we do that is we just challenge people to consider, hey, Glenn, is it possible that the reason why you struggle with bosses is because you don't like authority figures? Let's talk about why you don't like authority figures. What's that about, right? And the way that we do that oftentimes is through a counseling skill called interpretation. Interpretation is a really key skill. Maybe you talk about interpretation in your basic counseling skills class. Interpretation is a counseling skill where the helper gives to the client their perspective. It's through this form of a statement or a question. And to me, interpretation is kind of like connecting dots. So if you were my therapist and I was talking about how, yeah, I don't get along well with people, I don't get along my bosses, they don't know what they're doing or whatever it may be, and I tell you that story, and then I start telling you about my childhood, and I say, yeah, my dad was an alcoholic and he was in and out of my life, and then my mom had a boyfriend and he was a jerk, and then he left, and then my mom remarried my stepdad. I had whatever, all these negative relations with authority figures. In your mind, you might start thinking, I wonder if the reason why Glenn struggles with authority figures today is because of all those old experiences. So there's like two dots here, right? There's Glenn's problems today, and there's his past and his struggles with authority figures in the past. And I wonder if these two aren't connected. So what you might do is you might suggest to me through what's called interpretation. It could be through a question. You might say, "Hey, Glenn, have you ever considered that maybe these two things are connected?" What two things? Well, you struggling with all these authority. It sounds like you don't like people telling you what to do, and you kind of grew up in a situation where a lot of people who you didn't have any respect for were telling you what to do. You ever thought about that? Maybe that's what's going on today is all this old stuff back here that you've never really gotten over, right? So interpretation is like connecting dots. And sometimes we just do it through a question. Have you ever thought about, have you ever considered, hey, here's what I'm hearing. I'm kind of wondering if maybe part of why blank is happening is because of blank. What about you? You ever thought about that? That's called interpretation. So from a psychoanalytic perspective, we use a lot of interpretation, right? As far as helping people to understand or at least consider that, hey, maybe why I'm struggling like I am today is maybe a little bit deeper, right? And then there's this last issue, and this was one of the questions in your homework this week. This is the first counseling approach that really was kind of formally organized back in the day. And here's one of the ideas that Freud really believed in that still today we believe in. And not everyone likes it. Not every client likes it. Here's the deal. The phrase we use is the phrase working through problems. Well, what does that mean? Well, really what that means, it just means talking through. And if you've ever been to a counselor, or if you've ever seen any videos of counseling sessions, you know that counseling is talking. Well, what do people talk about? They talk about themselves and their problems. Well, why do they do that? That's a great question. Have you ever thought about that? Why? So people go to counseling all the time. People go to get degrees. My degree is in counseling personally. People become that they work all their lives as counselors. All they do all day long is sit around and talk to people. Well, what's the benefit of that? Well, Freud was one of the first people, the first sort of theorist who really developed this idea that talking through and working through, talking through to work through problems is beneficial for people. So the first thing we do is raise people's awareness about the possibility that, hey, is it possible that what you're struggling with today is this issue? And then if they realize, yeah, I wonder if maybe the reason why I do struggle is because of all that junk that happened to me. Here's what you and I would do then. You would say, well, let's talk about that. So tell me a little bit more about, you mentioned your mom had a stepdad, that your mom remarried and had a stepdad and that you guys didn't get along. Tell me about him. The client might say, well, he's been dead for 10 years. And you and I would say, if we were working from a Freudian perspective, we would say, that's okay. I just want to hear about it. Tell me his story. Tell me your story with him. Just tell me about him. And the idea is not being nosy. The idea is giving the client, or giving me, if I was a client, the opportunity to kind of talk out and work through and process, what did I think about this person? What do I believe about this person? How is how has my relationship with that person affected me today potentially, right? So talking through. If you're ever going to work as a counselor, let me just give you this as a heads up. You're going to get used to many people asking you this question. Why do you want me to talk about that? Because as counselors, that's always my running joke. As counselors, we're nosy. I tell people when I work with them in counseling, I'm nosy. So be prepared. I'm going to ask you a bunch of, that's just how counseling works, right? And so clients will sometimes say, well, why do you want me to talk about that? I mean, I hadn't thought about my mother in 40 years. Why do you want me to go back and talk about her? Well, the reason why we do that as counselors is for this very reason we're talking about today with psychoanalytic theory. The idea that sometimes those old issues that we've never dealt with, if there are old issues that we've never dealt with, oftentimes those are the root of today's struggles. So if we're going to deal with today's struggles, we got to get down to the root. And if the root is in my unconscious mind or something from my past, well, then we need to dig it up a little bit, right? We need to dig it up a little bit, just like you would dig up the root of a weed to get rid of the weed, or you'd pull it up. Same idea here, right? And so the idea of talking through, let's talk for a little bit about that. Just real quickly about talking through people talking through their problems. 2 or 3 real quick just benefits, and then this will be the end of this video. One of the benefits, and again, this is important to think about, this is a key idea with this theory, psychoanalytic theory, the idea of talking through to work through a problem. What are the benefits of talking through? If I were to ask you that question, think about what's the benefit of talking about an old issue. Let's say that, my stepfather was physically abusive to me, And when I was 16 years old, he kicked me out of the house, wouldn't let me come back. And he was harsh to me, and he abused my mother in front of me, and he favored my younger brother over me. So today I have all of this resentment built up over him. What would be the benefit of me talking about him and my feelings about him? Well, a couple of ideas. Number one, talking about an old problem gets it out in the open. And so it becomes less hidden and it becomes less internal, it becomes external. So there's the venting, and there is a benefit, there is a potential benefit to you and I venting and talking out our problems and getting it out of ourselves into the open. There's a benefit to that. Number two, by sharing about a struggle that I have with someone else, it helps them bear the load with me. So I'm not alone. A lot of people go through this life and they feel totally alone in their struggles. And when I share my problem and what I'm going through with someone else, hopefully, now I've got a partner to help bear that with me. I'm not alone. Someone else knows what I'm going through and they can help to encourage me and support me. Number three, related to that, is this idea. Sometimes we're too close to our situations, and when we share a problem with someone else, they may have a different perspective than we do because they're not in the middle of our situation. And so they can give us feedback or direction or encouragement or a challenge that we may need because maybe we don't see it, that maybe we don't see everything, and they oftentimes can see it that because they're objective, they may be able to give us feedback on a situation that we may not be able to always see. That happens all the time in counseling. It's one of our greatest roles. It's not tell people what to do, but to help people to see different alternatives, whether it's a different perspective, a different choice, or whatever, that it's hard for them to see or they've stopped seeing because they're so close to their situation. And then lastly is this. Have you ever had this situation? This happened to me actually not too long ago. Have you ever been talking about a situation and you're talking, maybe you're complaining or whatever, you're talking, and as you're talking, boom, the light goes off in your head. And suddenly you think about something you've never thought of before. Maybe you see a solution you'd never thought of before. And as you're talking, for whatever reason, your brain gets working, right? That happened to me not that long ago. Within the last year or so, I was going through a situation, not a big deal. I was talking to a friend of mine at my church about a situation that was kind of going on in my life, and he was just listening. He wasn't saying, he was just listening. And as I was talking, I was kind of complaining, kind of about, yeah, I don't know what to do, whatever. And as I was talking, the light bulb went off. And suddenly I realized, I thought of something. I saw a perspective I'd never thought of before. I was like, oh, wait, I never thought about that, right? That happens all the time in counseling. Clients, you'll say, tell me a little bit about your stepdad or whatever. And they'll start talking. And as they're talking, it's one of the great things about working as a counselor. As they're talking, you can see the light bulb go off. You aren't saying, you're just listening. And they're like, whoa. And there's something about the cognitive part, emotional part of talking out a problem that sometimes it gives us a different perspective. We can see a perspective that we maybe did not see before as we talk it out. So this theory especially is a big believer in talking stuff out as a way to work stuff out, to come up with new perspectives, to see something different, to feel a little bit better about it, to make peace with something, to resolve something, to let it go, to put it down, right? To move forward, whatever that may be. And kind of the idea from this theory is if we don't do that, we carry those old, often unconscious issues with us. So part of our role as helpers is to help people to see those issues and to consider the possibility that they need to maybe address those issues to work through them so that they can then deal with whatever issues kind of going on in their lives. So we use, as old as this theory is, we use psychoanalytic theory concepts all the time today. This is just a little summary of them. Go and look at chapter 4 in your textbook. Go and look at the lecture notes. Do your discussion question. Do your homework. Get ready for quiz number 1. Come back next week, and we will be talking about our next theory, and we'll just keep on moving. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.